going inside the issues of our community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Last Tuesday, President Obama signed the $787 billion economic stimulus bill into law. This combination of tax cuts and spending programs focused on infrastructure is geared toward stimulating job creation and kickstarting an economic recovery. Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. $787 billion nationally, $8.2 billion for Ohio. Numbers that are hard to comprehend. How does that infrastructure money get translated into local activity and local jobs? We begin with a report prepared by Local 12 reporter Jeff Hirsch, who tried to translate those giant figures into something that's understandable.
Galbraith Road between Winton and Daly is a quilt of pothole patches, a bumpy way to work for those who must endure it.
I'm here 6 days a week, to and from it at least, and it's bad. It's pretty bad. There's a lot of holes in it.
But Galbraith Road between Winton and Daly is among $6.5 million in repaving projects, which County Engineer Bill Brayshaw told the governor are ready to go once the cash arrives.
We have a tremendous need, and we are very happy with the stimulus program because it will help us to meet some of that need.
Now, when you drive a bone-jarring, car-rattling road like this, you know what sometimes happens? Your hubcaps come off. I found this by the side of the road. But if the stimulus bill does what it's supposed to do, not only will your hubcaps stay in place, but people will get jobs. Here's how. Fixing this road requires asphalt. The asphalt factory requires workers. The road contractor needs workers too. Multiply this stretch of road times lots of others, and it all adds up.
This stimulus bill will bring resources totaling about $8.2 billion to Ohio.
Money for Medicaid, education, infrastructure, health and human services, energy, and criminal justice projects. Plus, it will head off more state service and job cuts.
We think that this will enable us to have a balanced budget.
To explore the bigger picture of infrastructure development as it relates to our regional transportation system, I'm joined this morning by Mark Policinski, the Executive Director of the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments. OKI is the federally mandated regional transportation planning agency that coordinates transportation decision-making with economic development strategies. Mark, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
These are big numbers, and when we got all the discussion started about the stimulus package, it was infrastructure, infrastructure, infrastructure. Then the negotiations started, the sausage making behind.
Democracy took hold.
Took hold. Where did we end up from your perspective? Because it's infrastructure is your business, really.
There's two ways to look at it. One, every extra dollar we get is dramatically needed. But we are disappointed that a bill that started out with $300 to $500 billion going for infrastructure ended up only sending $30 billion. But we can't complain about what we didn't get. What we have to concentrate on is what we did get, and we have to spend it wisely.
When you say infrastructure, and Jeff listed all of those different things, right, that there's health, there's education. Some of that education money is about school buildings in some cases. Are you counting that as infrastructure?
No, the $30 billion is strictly aimed at what we call transportation infrastructure.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear about that. So it depends on who's using what language is always a trick here. Now, your office provided some information about the amount of money that Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana are going to get for infrastructure now. Right. How does that sort of fall out for us?
Well, how it falls out for us in the region is that from Ohio we're going to get about $30 million, from Kentucky about $8 million, and we're going to get about $150,000 for Indiana. Interesting, in Indiana it's going to leverage some projects.
We've got a full screen up. This shows the entire state. These are much larger numbers, obviously. Let's go to the second full screen, which was Mark was referencing before. So $30 million for Ohio, $8 million for Kentucky, only $150. But that's in the region that OKI supervises.
Right. That's just Dearborn County.
Now this is money on top of what you would have otherwise had. So this is additional new money, right?
This is brand new money with various rules that are new to the game, such as we have to spend it within a certain amount of time. It has a use it or lose it provision. Unfortunately, all of the strings and regulations attach, so we have to be very, very careful that we go through this onerous federal process to spend the money.
Did you have an existing priority list of projects now? Bill Brayshaw was talking about a project, I guess he's saying it's shovel ready out on Galbraith Road, which, by the way, I go over that patch of road every day and I'm very anxious to have that thing fixed. But is that the sort of thing, do you have an existing priority list that you can apply this new money to, or is that something you're going to have to go through?
Well, we have a pipeline of projects of $9.5 billion. Now, obviously, you can't say that a lot of those are shovel ready, but a portion of them are, and what our responsibility at OKI is to pull through that list, figure out what is shovel ready, and then to work with communities, because communities may have projects that they want to advance more quickly than others, and we have to put all that together, and we have to come up with $30 million in Ohio.
And this all happens pretty quickly, too, as you were saying. You have to get these under contract and under work real quickly?
Well, one of the great surprises of the legislation, and as you say, this is when the sausage is being made, you never know what's going to come out. At the end of the day, MPOs like OKI,
MPOs mean?
Metropolitan Planning Organizations,
okay, like
councils
OKI.
of government.
Okay.
They were given extended time frames to spend their money. The state has 120 days to obligate 50% of their funds or they lose it. MPOs have until September of 2010 to obligate their money. So we have a little bit more time. However, we have to remember that we have to get projects moving as quickly as possible. So there will be very, very short-term projects in, such as resurfacing and things like that. That has to be part of it. But we're hopeful that we'll be able to add a few projects that might be longer term, but they might have more of an impact, let's say, economically on the region.
Does OKI have to approve every transportation project? So that Galbraith Road job is something OKI has to sign off on before it goes?
Any transportation project, even if it's a bike path that has a penny of federal dollars in it, has to be approved by OKI.
Okay.
And that's what we do. I mean, we try to work with communities. We want to be a service agency, figure out how we can help them get projects advanced.
But you're critical then to getting this money into the economy and therefore getting jobs going.
Without sounding immodest, if you don't have OKI's approval, it's not going forward.
Okay. One of the things when you were on the last time, this was, I forget, 6 months ago, long before we were talking about the mess that we're in now, we were talking mostly about the upcoming reauthorization of the federal transportation bill, which happens every 6 years. Before we get to all the details of that, your big concern was not only the money that's involved there, but the streamlining of the process, the approval process. You have a lot of frustration with how much the regs force you to do. How does all of that impinge on getting this money into the economy really quickly?
Well, that's one of the things that's very interesting about this. Because you're in the OKI plan, you're at various stages of going through this onerous process. Because we're only, and I use these terms kind of frankly, but we're only talking about basically $40 million being spent. We probably have that many projects that are shovel ready to go. So we're able to get some short-term program like this through very easily. We'll have to work very closely with the jurisdictions, make sure we get the right mix. But those things can be handled more easily in a short-term package like this. Longer-term projects, that's when the process has to change, or it'll do a lot of bad things to whatever funding level comes into the new bill.
So let's get to some of those long-term processes. The big one, of course, is the new Ohio River Interstate Bridge, the replacement for the Brent Spence. I think everybody agrees this has got to happen. The capacity of that bridge just won't hold up any longer. This is a long process already. What are your hopes that you can streamline the process and move this forward in this next bill?
Well, what we've been working very diligently on for the past 10 months through an informal group called the Bridge Builders was trying to come up with a regional consensus as to what would be the augmentation to the bridge. And 10 months ago, when we were given this charge, if somebody said you're going to have to come up with a consensus, I don't think we would have agreed we could have done it. I think we have done it. Now we're working is a good word, I think, with our federal partners, trying to convince them that the folks in the region know best how to use our land. And we think if we can do that, then we will have the opportunity to advance fewer alternatives forward, which will cut the amount of study time that's necessary, which will reduce the cost of the bridge. And when you consider that inflation in construction products is 12 to 14%, that means that those products double every 6 years. If you can cut a couple of years off the process, you're saving yourselves hundreds of millions of dollars.
With the economic downturn that we're in, are we seeing any rollback in construction costs, though? Or is that inflation slowing significantly, or even stabilizing or reversing?
Well, and that's a very interesting point, because what is happening is you're getting a moderation, a plateauing of very high rates of inflation. They're not going through the roof at 30%. They've pulled back, but they're still very significant. And if you consider now, we're going to have a huge infrastructure investment in this country for a variety of things like you mentioned, that's just going to cause a demand. But you have to remember, again, we do not live in a national economy. It's a global economy. You know, the demand for cement in India and China affects the ability for us to get cement here.
Well, actually, I'm being perfectly honest with you now. When I was in China this summer, I was thinking about our conversation when you were on here last time about how long it takes us to get things done. Because in Beijing, they've built 3 new ring roads, 3 new circle freeways, I-275 types of things in the last 10 years, one farther out than the other. Now, that's a very different type of society, very different type of government. But the point is, they move things ahead, and the construction, I mean, the national bird of China is the construction crane. They're every place. So there is a lot of demand there, and even that's going to slow down, but it's going to be heavy.
Oh, outrageously heavy. China announced a few months ago a $2 trillion plan aimed at new infrastructure, above and beyond what they're already doing. And this plan would go on for not just 1 year, but several years.
Now, given the fact that this Transportation Reauthorization Act is coming up, okay, we've talked about all of this money that's come in through the stimulus package, but you were expecting a new hit of money anyway sometime this year. So the federal government should, by all expectation, there should be even more transportation money, right? Later this year?
Right. Well, the bill's supposed to pass this year. If it does, it'll be the first time a bill ever passed on time.
Okay.
But we anticipate, we hope that there'll be basically a doubling of the funding for transportation infrastructure. That's the kind of investment we need. We have to quit underinvesting in our infrastructure. There are congestion issues. There are safety issues. But we now live in a global economy, and we've just talked about it. We have to compete with India and China and Europe, and we can't do that in an economy that's built on on-time delivery if we can't deliver goods to and from markets.
On another sort of high-profile project, where does the proposed Cincinnati streetcar fit into either the stimulus funding or the transportation reauthorization funding?
Well, it's my understanding that just recently the city has decided to go for federal funding. This is a change in how they were going about it. It means that they do go into this federal process. We'll work with them in any way we can to navigate that process, to change that process, and we'll help in any way we can to get funding.
But that's not the stimulus money.
No, that stimulus money is very short term.
Very short term. Yeah. Okay. And one last thing, and we're almost out of time. When we were talking about the bridge project before, we rolled some video, and part of that had some people paying tolls. Where do we stand on the idea of tolls to help pay the cost of a new bridge?
Tolls are about as divisive an issue as you can imagine.
Yep.
Very wise people are on both sides of the issue. Here's what we have to do. We have to take a deep breath, step back. We've got time first to develop what kind of bridge we're going to have, and then we're going to have to get through the Congress, get through the funding, and then we have to figure out how we're going to pay for the local share. We have time to get to that decision. We don't need to be removing them from the table now.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much. If you would like details about the stimulus program in Ohio, check out the official recovery website, www.recovery.ohio.gov. You can even submit a proposal yourself. Now, I'm not sure how far that'll go, but anyway, stay tuned after the break. A conversation with the author of a new book about successful Cincinnatians. Welcome back. A few years ago, I was reflecting on how I ended up doing Newsmakers. I came to realize that at least since I was a senior in college at Xavier University in '67, '68, I ran something called Faculty and Student Talks, FAST, every Friday afternoon. Who would show up for that, right? What I have loved is listening to people and trying to ask questions that cause them to explore their ideas and reveal their personalities. Well, a book called The Success Effect: Uncommon Conversations with America's Business Trailblazers has recently been published by longtime Cincinnati Enquirer reporter John Eckberg. And I am joined this morning by John, who this is sort of the product of a lot of interviews over the years. How did this come about?
A lot of time. I realized pretty quickly when you're a business reporter that you meet a lot of interesting people, that you're pretty much able to use some of what they say, but often just going after snippets. And I would take the tape from these interviews and put them in a drawer because what they said was significant. One day I looked in there and saw 40, 50 tapes in there and went, I wonder if there's a book. Well, having an idea for a book and actually creating the book, two different things. Had to set that alarm at 4 a.m., get up 2-3 mornings a week, and I decided, the last thing the world needs is another business book from a Swami, somebody who thinks they know what they're doing. But what was interesting was what the stories these people were telling about how they created their companies, how they created, some people just almost a Rumpelstiltskin thing, created vast fortunes just out of a great idea. And I had the presence of mind to ask them too what CDs they were listening to and what books were on their nightstand, and boom.
One of the things that, just to reinforce it from a different angle, what you do here is give the raw interviews, not the distilled down article or column that you wrote for the newspaper where you summarize it and you pull it all together. That's the same thing I think with Newsmakers. Newsmakers, this is not edited, and it is just, you can kind of watch people think, and that's sort of, you can read and sort of see people's ideas. It's not just looking for the quick bite.
And I had, personally, I did this, and I kind of felt a little bit of cringe sometimes because I'd read that I'm sort of cloying to Donald Trump,
Right.
It's like, ew, why would I act? But I thought, I'm putting it in there, warts and all. We're just going to go ahead and, one, let these people tell the stories, and two, let the reader see really what a journalist thinks and what a journalist asks while they're thinking, and what I thought was important in those interviews. It's all there.
A lot of different types of people here. You start out with Dave Pelz, is that how you pronounce it?
Dave Pelz, yeah.
Who coaches golf. I mean, I always find it interesting why somebody starts the way they do. Why would you choose somebody like that?
He was coming to town, or sending his people to town for a clinic, and I realized that that's in and of itself interesting, that there's a traveling golf clinic teaching people how to be a better golfer. I get on the phone to Dave Pelz and I find out that it's beyond that. He had a quintessential career pivot point. He was a NASA space scientist, one of 13 division leaders on the floor of Goddard Space Center, watching Neil Armstrong bounce around the moon, and he's thinking, boy, if I would have not three-putted 14th green yesterday, I would have shot a 68. And that's when he realized he had just about reached the pinnacle of his profession and he was still unhappy. What made him happy was golf. So a lot of what this book is about people realizing when they were unhappy, when they were dissatisfied, when they wanted more. I call them career pivot points. And I think a lot of people have these career pivot points, which actually become pivot, Ken Lowe of Scripps noticed that there was a rack of magazines selling Better Homes and Gardens, but there was no cable channel for the home. And he tells the story of how he made the transition between why isn't there cable programming devoted to the home. I think the company invested, which is, we business reporters call that investment, invested about $48 million in the company. That's always a euphemism for just bleeding red ink over the couple of years. But in the next decade, that idea had now come to fruition, and I believe they had about $2 billion in revenues and $700 million in net. It literally is a Rumpelstiltskin story. So the book is full of stories like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of them that's in here, and it's somebody that everybody knows and wouldn't necessarily see as a business mind, Jerry Springer.
Right.
And talk about somebody who has faced several pivot points in his life, his professional life, and made career changes from politician to TV person. It's kind of interesting to hear him respond to your questions about that.
He was just audacious. And let's face it, and when he started, he was a councilman living on the west side of town in a 2-bedroom apartment, one of maybe 80 council members in Ohio who decided, I'm going to run for governor. Oh, yeah. Okay, sure, you're going to run for governor. And what he did, which I thought was just so fascinating, is that he went and got a list of private plane owners in Ohio because he figured they were entrepreneurial. He figured that private plane owners would support someone from outside the mainstream. He started calling them. He raised $1 million for his race. He got slaughtered in the primary. I don't even think he got 15% of the vote against Celeste. But the fact is that he came up with this audacious idea, led to TV. He started out at a competing station that had the lowest ratings because he knew that he only had one way to go. It's always smart to ride a dog. Learned the business, got into the talk show, and my theory is he really transformed advertising in many ways because this didn't even exist until Jerry Springer came on and brought all these eyeballs to bear, and now voila, billions of dollars are spent on talk shows.
Well,
advertising.
One of the things as you read through these various interviews is all of these different people who've got an idea, developed an idea, faced one of those pivot points, and had all sorts of success. What do you think all that collective wisdom, though, tells us about what we're facing right now in this terrible economic downturn? All these people were successful, but does all that insight and experience lead us anyplace right now?
Well, here's the funny thing about America. Boy, you put America in a corner, and if the one thing we have going for us is we're just ingenious. The people, our great country enables in kind of the individual to create an idea and manifest that idea in a product or a service that refine. I think we're going to see a new era of entrepreneurism myself. What happens, I think, when people get laid off many times is they go looking for other work, but then they start a company or they start a business, and a lot of those businesses are going to fail. And so the theory of this book was that we're not all going to be moguls like Sam Zell, who owns the Tribune Company and owned J-Corps here in town for a while. We're not going to be...
And who's in bad financial shape at the
Bad
moment.
financial shape, theoretically. But the fact is that the Tribune Company has 30 blocks of downtown property in major metropolitan areas. Maybe it wasn't a media play. Maybe it was a real estate play. Maybe there'll be some consolidations with newspaper ownership. So the fact is these people see things the rest of us don't see. But we're not all going to be moguls. So I decided, okay, I'm going to have about 30% of the book moguls, kind of cultural icons of commerce. Another 30% are going to be entrepreneurs who came up with the great idea. And another 30% will be the academics and the consultants to tell us, come on, how you get along better at work. How can you tell when someone's lying to you? How can you tell when someone's disrespecting you? So it became this book of about 40 interviews that I think offers a real big panorama of.
One last person I'm going to have to ask you about is Sean
Diddy,
P. Diddy, whatever the name is.
I'm his man, by the way. He said, thanks, my man, so I am his man. Diddy has an empire called Sean John Clothing. Did some crunching, chased some numbers down, $450 million a year in gross revenues from Sean John Clothing. So just say 20% of that's profit. I don't know what the number is, but even if it's 10%, that's $45 million a year. Now, if you had $45 million a year in profit coming in, would you go on Broadway as Raisin in the Sun and an actor who's classically not trained as an actor? I don't think so. The fact is, he did. Why did he do that? Because he's entrepreneurial and because he just is unsatisfied with the way his life was. He faced the worst critics in America, the Broadway scribes, and decided he'd do it even though he's not a classically trained actor. That kind of personality is just so intriguing to me. How does someone like that tick? And that's kind of what I wanted the book to be about.
Well, it's the success effect and by John Eckberg. It's in all the bookstores, I think, as far as I saw it a lot during the Christmas season. And it's really a fun read.
You may be more likely to get a book in Times Square than you will in Westwood, but it's all around everywhere. And thanks for having me on the show today. I really enjoyed it.
That's fun. It's always fun to have some of you old-style print people around.
There you go. Yeah, that's
okay, John, thank you. And thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the men and the women shaping our community for the future. Have a good week.